Welcome into Rounding the Bases.
Round the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. It's around the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. He's a man, goddamn is he.
Welcome into Rounding the Bases, the podcast about culture and leadership with a baseball twist, presented by Community America Credit Union. Hi, everyone. Hope you are doing well. My name is Joel Goldberg. And before we get started, a quick shout out to my good friends at Chief of Staff Kansas City, one of the best recruiting firms, not just in Kansas City, but around the country, making connections that matter. They are making an impact in so many people's lives and companies. So I hope you'll check them out. Completely give my thumbs up to them and really enjoy doing a lot of work in terms of culture with Chief of Staff KC.com. There are some guests that I have on Rounding the Bases that, quite frankly, I don't have to do as much work in prepping for because I know them well. Although in the case of my guest this episode, he's someone that I've been able to get to know much better, or at all for that matter, in the last couple of years. So today's guest on Rounding the Bases has been in business for nearly 4 decades, but to this day remembers the exact words that inspired his entire career. To quote verbatim, they went, "You're fired." And they were the catalyst for his self-made story. Joining me is Marc LeBlanc, the corporate dropout turned legendary speaker, 4-time author, and masterful business coach. As a rookie, he was accused of not having what it took to make it on his own. Determined to prove the naysayers wrong, he went into business for himself at the ripe young age of 21, and he's never looked back. After years of trial, error, and choosing action over perfection, he's become known as the Grow Your Business Guy. With unique perspectives and an approach to business that breaks the mold, it's no wonder he's garnered a reputation for success that reverberates around the globe. That's the written copy. The personalized piece, which I kind of started with a little bit, is the fact that I'll tell everyone right now, it's not really a disclaimer, it's not an admission or anything like that, but maybe just some perspective that Marc happens to be my business coach over the last year and a half, almost 2 years now. And I talk so much about small ball, the little things that add up to the big results. It's the foundation. It's those pieces to your life, your business, your performance on the sports field, whatever it is that maybe not everyone sees. And I believe a good coach is part of that. And there are a million coaches out there, but I'm very partial to mine and his style and his approach. So with that said, I bring in the aforementioned Marc LeBlanc. Marc, how are you?
Hey, Joe, good to be with you.
It's good to be with you. I'm excited. I told you before we started that I don't know where this is going, and I mean that in the best of ways, because almost like, well, I should say any of your coaching sessions always have direction and planning. I'm not suggesting you don't, but oftentimes they just go where they go in the best of ways. So of course, I want to get into all that, and maybe you could even analyze what the hell is wrong with me or not, and we could do that. But, you've written a number of books. I've got many of them, and including the most recent that you sent me, Never Be the Same. I want to talk about that. For those that are watching on YouTube, you'll see the picture of a man hiking out in the middle of nowhere behind Marc. And that is Marc. We're definitely going to be talking about one of the most important, I believe, elements of your life, or certainly one that brings you passion and purpose in the Camino Trail. But first and foremost, let's just start with a simple, how are you? And in the midst of this crazy changing world still, as we run this one, I know that your world has really pivoted in the last couple of years, and I think that you have nailed it in the sense that you haven't slowed down.
Oh, thank you, Joel. And like I said, it's good to be with you. So much has changed in the last approximately 2 years ago. 2 years ago today, I was speaking in La Jolla, California, on a 3-week speaking trip to Southern California in Albuquerque. And I flew home on March 13th, and our lives shut down. And I think part of what has helped me, Joel, is I could see it coming. And I embraced Zoom and video right out of the gate. And as you know, one of the questions that drives me and has driven me for nearly 40 years is what will meet the best of what my clients need and want. And I knew that a lot of people were isolated, were experiencing the challenge of change. And we've done a number of things in the last 2 years to, I guess, take advantage or to leverage that. But one of the things I often share is no change, no change. And we changed very quickly.
Well, you have to, or you don't, and the game passes you by. I mean, that's just the way it is. And you know, the world has always changed. It's not, we haven't maybe seen it like this, and maybe we have, you know, we hadn't seen it like 9/11. We haven't seen it like whatever the next big one will be, whatever that is, but it will change. And you know, I'm constantly amazed at the high level people. I'm not taking a shot here, that want to keep things the way they were, which I get it. It's comfortable, but it might not be applicable anymore. So much of what you have done with your coaching clients has been often face to face and personal. I mean, you are legendarily known for holding these big events every single year. When I say big events, I don't mean like, I mean, I just mean that these intense, great conferences, bringing people together. I'm not talking about like lavish. Some people just do like the whole big trips and the getaways and all that. I'm saying you bring people together. Yet you found a different way to do that. And I'm curious, as you pivoted with your signature event, your Achievers Circle, how tough was that? Not the logistics of figuring it out all on Zoom, but just for yourself, knowing what a people person you are, knowing how much you feed off of being face to face, that what I'm guessing is that energy of having those people in the room. See, I don't think that's gone away. I did an Achievers Circle with you last year, and I walked away from that weekend. Well, from my spare bedroom to my bedroom was the amount of time it took to get there, but I felt great. So how difficult or not was that for you?
Well, it wasn't difficult. I mean, I resisted it until probably the last moment. And then I called it, and, you know, we notified our participants in mid-April of 2020 that we were now moving virtual, and we haven't looked back. I think the challenge of so many, Joel, when something happens, now at times it's a 9/11, or it's the economic downturn of 2008, or it's the pandemic. Those are things or events that happen to us. But sometimes we just get stuck or stalled out or a little bit stagnant. And interestingly enough, and I'd like to say that I am so smart that I figured this out at a very early opportunity, but when I feel stuck or stalled out or stagnant, or what happened at 9/11 or 2008 or 2020, is I immediately stepped back and I created something new. When you create something new, a new program, a new product, a new presentation, a new service, in my world, but when you create something new, it puts a little different spring in your step, puts a little different degree of spirit in your voice. Now, I had a Zoom account for 2 years prior to April 1st of 2020, and nobody wanted to get on it. And overnight, it became the standard. And I am one that benefited from it. But when you create something new and you have a little different enthusiasm in your voice, it makes it that much easier to meet and make new contacts, or to go, what I call going back to the well, the people that you've been serving historically over time. And when you create something new, there's no better time. Here's what happened to a lot of professionals. They retreated like frightened turtles. And when you retreat like a frightened turtle, it's only natural to go look for another frightened turtle to commiserate. And 2 or 3 frightened turtles does not a trend make. And when you can rise above that and look at how to take advantage of what assets you have in front of you when the going gets tough, you can actually move through that period a lot easier.
A lot of frightened turtles out there. I mean, they didn't have to be turtles either. A lot of us were just frightened, but did you retreat or did you push forward? I mean, that was it. I want to get into your background in a minute, but I would just say that I hired you during the pandemic at a time where I was actually making no money and a little bit of money on the podcast, and that was it. I mean, I'd lost most of my revenue sources with the speaking initially, and certainly with baseball for 4 months. So it was definitely getting out of the comfort zone to say, boy, is this really the right time to do this when I'm just trying to stay afloat? But there's a little something there about, well, no, I needed to be able to push forward and not wait, which is something you talk about all the time. I want to get into some of your favorite quotes or sayings later in the podcast, but one of my favorites, so if this is your answer for when I ask it later at the end of the podcast, whatever, come up with a different one, is done is better than perfect. It's one of the best things that I've learned from you, because think about the things that are on our to-do lists, or what you often refer to as will-do lists. I'd love to write a book, but I'm not quite ready to have well, is there a chance you're going to be saying that same thing in 3 years and 5 years? For me, for sure. I don't know about starting a podcast. It's not quite the right time. Okay, when is going to be the right time? On and on and on. It feels to me like this pandemic really accentuated the meaning of done is better than perfect. Maybe not. Maybe it's just as meaningful as ever, but it seems to me like that was so applicable.
Well, it is. And I guess part of the question is, what do you have to gain, you or people that I'm either working with or speaking to? What do you have to gain by waiting? The only thing that you have to gain is more evidence of getting ready to get ready. And so when during the pandemic, you published your book, first book, by the way, and you launched your podcast, and you stayed in gear, and that's when great things are going to happen.
Yeah, I love the subtle reference there. That's Mark's way of reminding me that the first book does not mean the last book. I think, I don't know that if I had just released it, was about to release it, or it was somewhere in that time frame when Mark says, I got your second and third title. I'm like, well, can we take a breath for a quick second? Which of course you weren't telling me not to, but you were certainly challenging me and reminding me that there's a lot there. And that is something we'll be working on throughout the course of this year. And it's coming. We're just not quite there yet. But let me go back a little bit, because you are someone that knows about writing multiple books. You are someone that knows about grinding through rejection and following your passion and finding your purpose. I mean, you are one of the most purposeful people I know. That I know you have bad days. I know that you have down moments, and you'll share those with people like myself as well. But yet I don't ever see it affecting that purpose, which is what I call why you get up every single day, beyond, your family and your wife and all that. But I just see you as being so purpose driven every single day. And so I want to go back to the beginning when you were opening those doors. Where did the motivation come from? I don't know that 40 years ago you could picture this, or maybe you could, but what were you thinking 40 years ago?
I couldn't even imagine it. But let's go back to something you said in my introduction, and that is, at the age of 21, I had a job once for about 6 months, and I was inspired by the 2 words, "you're fired." And I made a vow at 21 that I would do whatever it would take to make it on my own. And I have. And I'm this year celebrating my 40th year of being in business for myself. And as you would guess, with all of the people that you interview, and anyone that you or I, or anyone that anyone admires, people tend to look at us and sometimes think that, well, it was pretty easy for Joel. Or, Mark seems to have made all the right decisions. And very few people will believe me when I say more has gone wrong for me over the course of 40 years than has gone right. Someone said to me once, LeBlanc, do you want to know the good thing about you? And I said, well, sure. I mean, do we have enough time? and, and he said, you are a quick switch artist. And I said, well, that's interesting. What do you mean by that? And he said, you, more than anyone I know, have the unique ability to try something and then quickly step back and look at what worked or how it's working or why it's working and let go very quickly of what's not. But I want you to go back to the language, because I think language is everything.
Mm-hmm.
At that moment when I was 21, I made the decision, I'm going to do whatever it takes. When you use language like that, there's no room for retreat. I mean, you might step back and get wounded from time to time, and I certainly have some of the scars to prove it. But when you have that kind of language, it was shortly after that, Joel, when I was introduced to the National Speakers Association. I'm 21 years old, and I walked into a room of speakers and I thought, what? You mean this could be a career? People get paid to speak? And I thought, that's it. I went home for Christmas a couple of weeks after I discovered this organization, and I told my dad, I now know what I want to do for the rest of my life. And he said, what's that? And I said, I'm going to be a professional speaker. So take that in concert with, I will do whatever it takes. I now know what I want to do for the rest of my life. And those two phrases are a 1-2 punch. I don't get to throw in the towel, although there certainly have been times when I've wanted to.
Well, it's a fascinating journey, because first off, everything that you just said could, in theory, apply to almost anything, any profession. So this is not a how to become a speaker. As a matter of fact, a lot of your clients are speakers because you've encouraged them to do that in support of their business or their career. But it's not, you are not someone that, say, a speaker says, okay, I want to be a great speaker, let me go to Mark. That might be the case, maybe not. In my case, it was I really want advice and counseling and coaching from someone that can help me develop the business side of speaking. Let you and I talk less about content, not that we don't, but more about the business side. And the reason why I bring this up, because I think it's true for almost every profession, it may not be totally true for every single role, is the people side of things, the organizational side of things. I am one of the most disorganized, all over the place, and it works for me in a lot of ways. The live television element of being able to roll with whatever happens, but yet you have helped me at times when I'm not turning into a turtle of staying focused, of having a task, of really focusing on these elements of small ball, those foundational elements every single day that make you better. To me, it seems like that is so much of who you are, of not being robotic, but of systems that make sense, that are workable. That to me is one of the biggest pieces to who you. I mean, along with authenticity and all those things. Is that something that you always had? Not where it's developed to now, but I mean, were you always kind of wired that way?
I think so. Now at 19, 20, 21, I didn't have a vision of being my own boss. It was thrust upon me, but I'm first and foremost, Joel, I'm a business owner, and you are an artist. You're a creative, I'm going to say genius. And one of my pearls of wisdom is think like an artist, but act like a business owner. And I think that if I were to, summarize your career or our relationship in the last couple of years, is that you have taken that creativity and we have put some systems into place, and we have a few more to go. But you are acting more like a business owner all the time.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like every day, this is self-inflicted. Every day I sit there and think, look at all the things that I'm still not grasping or doing that LeBlanc is telling me to do, that I need to talk to him about, that I'm still missing this. And then you come back and remind me of all the things that I am doing right. I bring that up because I think that we all, you said something before about, people just something along the lines of, well, Joel's got it all figured out, or this guy. Well, none of us have it all figured out. And none of us are immune from the issues of life, personal, professional. But we also, most of us, in some form or another, whether we're willing to admit it or not, most of us have that imposter syndrome, some form of it. And same for me, right? Well, I can't believe I'm not doing this. I'm behind on that. Why am I not doing this? And life gets in the way, or bad habits, or whatever it is. But I think it's really powerful when you can go back. I know one of the things that you'll do and say, what's something you accomplished in the last week? What's something you accomplished today? What's something you accomplished in the last 90 days? I almost view it like when you're looking at, a younger child growing up, your own kids, or in your case, nieces or nephews. And if you see them every day, you don't really notice how much they're growing. But if you take that pull back, you look at how much they've grown in the last 6 months. And it feels like, to me, that's something that you work on with everyone.
I do work on it, and my sliver of the world, or my focus in the marketplace, is independent and practice professionals, people who sell their time and their talent, their experience and their expertise, whatever type or stripe. And I think that imposter syndrome is something that plagues so many people. And I guess my slogan or theme that embodies so much of my work is, when you are the business. And when you are the business, Joel, or when I am my business, we make up stories all the time about what we're not doing or what we could be doing better. And one of the things that was somewhat transformative for me was approximately, I'm going to say 4 years ago, but I just started tracking my achievements every 30 days. And every 30 days, I can go back, I can scroll through my list month by month since 2017. And I'm going to say, on average, probably 6 achievements every 30 days. They could be small, medium, or large. But boy, on those days when I'm tired or frustrated, or maybe I've been fired, or maybe a presentation hasn't gone as well as I've wanted it to go, I can just start scrolling through these achievements and say, and even the last 2 months, it's like, oh my gosh, I've actually done quite a bit in the last, just since the first of the year. Now, why that's so important is it's like a chiropractic adjustment for your head, or it's like a chiropractic adjustment for your heart. And sometimes we just need that nudge or that reminder, whether you get it from me or whether you get it from tracking your achievements, that keeps us in the game, that keeps us swinging the bat and getting up and looking to do our best each and every day.
Just they're little reminders, and sometimes bigger reminders too. The flip side of that, something I learned from you at the Achievers Circle, was setting these, and everything that you do is always, I want to ask you about language in a moment, but you think through the wording of everything in such an intentional way, by design, I believe. And so I mentioned before, you don't call it a to-do list, you call it a will-do list. And there's clearly a difference, right? We all live in the to-do list. What happens to a lot of my to-do lists? I get to what I get to, but no guarantees I will do it. And so you're trying to get that commitment to the will-dos. But I love that, I learned about breaking down, I guess maybe not all lists are created equal. And so picking 3 things to do in the next 30 days, 3 things to do in the next 90 days, 3 things to do in the next year, and then checking them off and putting new things in there so that instead of it being this list of 25 things, but I think your terminology was parking the rest of them, almost like they're in the waiting room, and then you bring them in. And I found that to be really beneficial instead of just, oh my goodness, I've got to get to these 100 things.
Well, 25 things on a to-do list would probably be pretty short. But what I've discovered and so much of what I share started with my problems first. And we often underestimate the amount of time something is going to take. We overestimate our ability to get things done, and life happens along the way. But when we really look at our to-do list, or we update our to-do list, probably 90% of it should be just reshifted or moved into a parking lot so that we can isolate what is most important in the next 30 days, 90 days, and in the next 12 months. But as you well know, my definition is what will you do and get done, not what you think you can do or not what you're hoping to do. If you're not committed to getting it done in the time period that you set, then you've got to either change the time period or kill it if it's something you think you should do. You know, we all have things on our normal to-do list that were on our list a year ago, and we haven't even taken a step.
Yeah.
And when those items on our to-do list stay there and get stagnant, it's almost as if they're shaming us.
A couple more I want to hit you with. The first is this is nothing new, but I feel like it's accentuated right now by, I don't know, desperate times. You know, when people get desperate. Think about, I don't know, this is probably a bad analogy, but when people get desperate, they do things they're not supposed to do, right? So, you know, you're out of money, you're this or that, and so you start to see more crime, theft, whatever it is. Well, right now, because of the pandemic, people are trying to reach out and cold calling, you know, via social media and email and all this in ways that are much worse than ever before. I mean, I could look at the first 3 words or sentence of somebody every single day and just send it right to spam, because they have told me that, hey, here's my Calendly, pick a time, and I thought, have you asked yet? And I know that that's not anything new. However, it just seems more. The volume of messages I get every day telling me how somebody can help my podcast when I could clearly tell they've never listened to it, met me, or even attempted at an introduction is, oh, I get it. They're blasting it out to everybody. And if they click on 1 or 2, hey, congratulations. It's not my style. I know it's not your style. Maybe that creates a better lane for those of us that are willing to do things the right way and the more personal way. But I was thinking about this. There's one thing, and if you don't get the answer off the top of your head, I'll fill in the blank for you. There's one thing you've never asked from me from the day that I met. Do you know what that is? My business. I've never once heard you ask for my business. You told me what you could do. If you're interested, I'd love to help you. By the way, if you want to leave, that's great too. What I've learned from you is that you let people make those decisions. You know, you certainly give them the information, and you also make it as comfortable as possible for them. And I think most of us miss that because we want to get to the end. And yet, to me, it seems like you just go with the process, and it takes you where it takes you. And I'm curious about the amount of discipline that at least over the years took you, or if that's something that you always had.
Well, let's go back to your original comment of desperation. When we're desperate or we're scared or our ego gets in the way, we tend to make the great commitment. It's similar to the New Year's resolution. And over the course of time, I mean, I certainly didn't understand this because 40 years ago and 35 years ago and 25 years go. I thought that my aim was to make a sale. And over the course of time, my aim is to create a relationship. And as you know, I've got relationships that go 10, 20 years and longer. In fact, I just had breakfast to Super Bowl morning with my mentor, a person I've been in a relationship with now for 39 years.
Wow.
And so I'm a relationship guy first, but I practice, I guess, I don't know how to describe this other than detachment. My responsibility is to get in conversation with you or someone else and sort of present myself on a platter and then let go of whatever may or may not happen, trusting that you can make the right decision for you. I don't need to put you in a headlock and squeeze till you buy, but it's still my responsibility to serve it up. Because I know, Joel, that the best time for somebody to work with you or to hire you to speak, the best time for somebody to reach out to me is when the time is right for him or the time is right. And I have to trust that. You know, sometimes when I get scared, I have to, I bite my tongue. You know, I want to jump in there and make it happen sooner rather than later. But it's been proven out more and more and more that if the timing is not right now, I have a lot of people come back to me when the time is right.
Well, and I think that there's something to be said about understanding the balance that you have to stay on the radar. It's not that you're just leaving them alone, because we do need to connect the dots, but they've got to be able to make the decision, right? And so there's a healthy balance between all of that.
Well, and I'll go behind the curtain a little bit, and that is, you never start with a relationship. A relationship evolves over time, and I think one of the mistakes that especially service professionals make is that if a check is written or a payment is made, we're now in a relationship. And that's just silly. Sometimes I think a relationship begins once there's some kind of a problem or a speed bump, and it's how people get through that. But you know, part of my philosophy or my approach, one is to make it easy for somebody to say yes. And I usually work on something I call a first step, next step basis. I make it easier for people to say yes, or safe for them to say yes. And as they begin to experience me more and more, the relationship evolves. I mean, you came to me and you went to, if I remember, you went to one of my 3-hour trainings called the Table of 12. You didn't hire me to be your coach, I think it was 3 months later or 4 months later. And that's, you know, so it's understanding a series of discrete events that often a relationship make.
Well, you laid the breadcrumbs, so to speak. And I never got I'd have to look back at my records, but I don't remember ever getting an email that I felt pressured. Yet when I went to that event, which, you know, and our mutual friend and one of your clients, Lauren Schieffer, had connected us. Just a quick short of the story, and the beauty of networking and trusting people is that I had met Shep Hyken, who has been a guest on this podcast, and I was telling him about some of what I was working on. I'm trying to look for blah, blah, blah. And he said, you know, there's this guy, Marc LeBlanc, out of Minnesota, and he's great at that. And, you know, he does all these, you know, these events, and you should go to one of them, and you kind of pay what you think it's worth. It's not going to, you know, okay. I kind of put that in the back of my head. And then Lauren had written a book. Well, I got Lauren's book. It came to me in the mail. She had asked me to write a testimonial. And so what's the first thing you do? We all have a little bit of ego. I wanted to go to the back of the book and see my testimonial, my name. Well, my name was right below yours. And I said, wait a minute, I know that name. Shep Hyken just mentioned him a couple of weeks ago. So I called up Lauren and she said, you have to get a hold of this guy. He's my coach and you'll love him too. So it's amazing how sometimes everything aligns. Then I went to that table of 12 and there was a feeling, there was a warmth, not to mention all the lessons that I learned, but I felt like I was a part of something. And so I knew I wanted to do that, but it had to come from me. And you gave me that freedom. The last question that I have, and it kind of also pertains to some of that, is language. Words, they do matter. I mean, we know that, but I don't know how many times I go to you and say, hey, how would you say this? Hey, I'm looking to talk to this CEO. I'm looking to send out this email. What's the right way to? And you always have the right touch on that, which I think tells me how important that is to you and how important the way we choose our words can impact what we do. To me, the one that always stands out, I always hear you say, if you're open to, that's the one I hear you say all the time. Instead of, hey, do you want to grab lunch? Hey, well, now you're forcing them to say, no, I don't, or yes, that I do. It's subtle. And I feel like everything that you have taught me with language is subtle. And I was curious about how, if I'm reading that right, how important that is to you. And if there's this love of words and language on your end.
I do have a love of words, of language. I think some people would probably say I'm very measured in either my comments or my presentation or my speaking style. Very thoughtful, deliberate, measured. Even in my communications, if I'm leaving a voicemail message or I'm sending an email message, I mean, it just follows a very simple a pattern or patter that I refer to as a 4-step, a greeting, an acknowledgement, the seed or the idea or the message, and then a wrap up. And, I've had people say to me, well, Mark, I work with very sophisticated people. I work with CEOs and, they would be offended, by such simplicity. And my response is always, the higher you climb on the leadership ladder or the more successful a person is that you're reaching out to, the more you better be a breath of fresh air, because they're not necessarily looking to be impressed. But somehow I latched on to this word, if, and the magic phrase is open to a conversation. If you would be open to a conversation about blank, I'd love to hear from you when the time is right for you. And that is such a soft knock on the door. Now, contrast this with, would you like to have lunch? And would next Thursday or the following Tuesday be better for you? Those old tactics and methods don't do anyone any good anymore.
And I believe the more desperate people get, whatever the times are, the more they go that other direction, which is still really the version of the scared turtle. It might be a more boisterous one, but it's a desperate one. Creates a very nice lane for those that are going to do things the authentic way and the right way. It almost accentuates it because people are not expecting it anymore. That it's, oh, wow, that was nice. That was easier. That wasn't stressful. It was nice to have a normal conversation. So it's something that I think we can learn from every single day. I want to get to my baseball themed questions. I promise you I won't ask about your Minnesota Twins, although that's not a shot. I think that if we're going to talk about a team up there that's had some decent success over the years, it would be your Twins over, say, that purple football team or your others. Anyway, that's just me getting a cheap laugh at your expense, but you know it. Baseball themed questions. What you've written 4 or co-written, been a part of 4 amazing books. You've got all of your clients. You've got an incredible speaking career, and on and on and on. Besides, of course, your beautiful wife, professionally speaking, what's the biggest home run you've hit?
Easy. The biggest home run I've ever hit in my career, in fact, I refer to it as a grand slam. And that is a year after the economic downturn of 2008, JP Morgan Chase Bank booked me to speak in 15 cities around the United States in 15 major markets to bring a message of a little bit of a can do, but a rock solid business message that don't sit back. That now more than ever, when your back is against the wall, now is the time to be more creative and innovative than ever before. And so for a professional speaker to land a contract like that and to have an organization like that trust you with their prospects and select clients was a major achievement in my career.
Big company, a lot of gigs there, a lot of trust and impact across the board. How about a swing and a miss, and what did you learn from it?
What immediately comes to mind is, remember the dream of the 21-year-old kid and 22, and I knew what I wanted. I knew that I would do whatever it would take. And I bombed in my first paid professional speech. And it was painful. What made it more painful that I didn't even realize that I had bombed until I got a letter from the client who said, "We are so unhappy with your performance that we are not," Joel, this is not the funny part of the program.
Sorry. I feel for you.
We are so unhappy with your performance. It was a group of 60 young managers. And looking back, I really was, I mean, one, I was young, but two, it was mostly just a book report. It wasn't a presentation that connected. But I was so hurt. I was so taken aback. This was my dream. And this was an opportunity. This was it. I'm getting paid to speak for the very first time. And I did retreat like a frightened turtle. But let me tell you what I learned in that experience. And that is, I stayed in the game and I continued to show up. And eventually I lived through or worked through that valley and came out on the other side.
Yeah, you got to stay in the game. It reminds me of a story I told in my book in a chapter, I think that was called Never Give Up. One of the star players of the Kansas City Royals was ready to be done. He just couldn't get that promotion from the minor leagues. And, it had been long enough. And he told his dad it might be time to be done. This player's name is Whit Merrifield. Actually, the first, well, I'll get to the punchline in a minute, but he was ready to be done. It just, can't get that call up. And his dad said that his dad, who had been this close, as close as could be to the big leagues when he was younger, and the dad had gotten called up, traveled across the country, was in the minor leagues in Canada, in like Vancouver or Edmonton, gets to Pittsburgh, and they take a look at him in batting practice. They had just acquired him in a trade. He was a minor leaguer, and it wasn't the day and age. This was the 80s of video and everything, so they didn't really know what they had. And the manager, Jim Leland, they took a look at him and said, "Nah, let's send him back to the minors. He got hurt and he never made it." So he tells his son, "That's fine, but once you take those spikes off, you can't get back in. Yeah. So if you're wanting to do this, you got to stay in the game." And he did. The punchline to it was he soon, within a few years, would go on to become the first right-handed batter in the major leagues to have back-to-back, I think, 200 hit seasons since Kirby Puckett of your Minnesota Twins. It doesn't happen as often for a righty. It's a little bit easier for a lefty, being closer on the other side of the plate. Anyway, I digress, or I move in, tangential ways that I often do. But let me ask you about the small ball. Which, by the way, I knew I was going to write a book about small ball. Mark was the one that helped me title that, Small Ball, Big Results. And there will be more coming. But what is small ball to you? What are the little things that add up to the big results in your life?
Well, and I love your small ball philosophy and your approach to work and life. And for me, Joel, you know me well. I harp on that what you do every day is more important than what you do once in a while. And so when we look at whether it's your morning routine or what are the actions, what are the small actions, what are the small activities that you do every day that will eventually add up to the big result. And for example, I mean, my wife and I say a prayer for somebody by name every day. I do 30 burpees every single day. I make a business development call every day. Those are the things that I'm actively engaged with over and over and over again. And the results have been incredibly cumulative. My wife and I, this sounds silly, but my wife and Sweet Ann and I, we play a little card game called Bank, a 2-person card game. It takes 20 minutes. We play every single day. Mm. And it gives us an opportunity, usually midday, to connect for about 20 minutes and talk about our day or our morning or what's going on. But whether it's something you do for fun and enjoyment or for business development or for your health and exercise, yeah, I can work out 2 or 3 times a week. Sure. But it's in between those, it's what I do every day that creates a foundation where I cement that foundation and am more likely to be unstoppable.
As good a definition of small ball as I have heard on this podcast. That's it, without a doubt. 4 final questions as we round the bases. These are sometimes lighthearted, sometimes not. They can be all over the place by design. The first one, you just alluded to it. I had it on my list of where I wanted to go anyway. If I didn't have it, I would have added it, because you know how I feel about this, is the topic of burpees. It's sort of a weird question to ask, although it generally tends to come up, not in every conversation with you, but on a regular basis. And it makes me cringe every time, because I don't think that there is a more evil exercise. And this is coming from someone that is working out regularly now, finally, in my life. But what about this obsession with burpees? I think it's absolutely the worst, most annoying exercise ever invented to man.
It is. And I don't think it ever really gets easier, although I've been a little bit stronger since taking this up. And I did not put on a lot of weight over the pandemic, but I sort of let go of working out. I wasn't feeling good. I was approaching 60. Here I'm 59 years old, and I'm not happy with myself. I'm not happy with how I feel. And I made the declaration in the fall of 2020. I said, by 1 year from now, I'm going to be in the best shape of my life. And I was scared to death. And I thought, well, how do I do this? And I thought, I'm going to do 10,000 burpees in the next 12 months. That was my goal. And then I decided to do 30 a day in, day out. But Joel, the best decision I ever made was to create a standard to never do more than 30. And that became my rallying cry, that no matter how miserable I felt, I could always get to 30. As I got stronger, it was only natural that I wanted to do more. It's like, hey, I can get to my goal faster. I could do 30 in the morning. I could do 30 at noon. I could do 30 at supper time. And all of a sudden it was like, no, I had created the standard that said never do more than 30. Always do 30, whether you feel like it or not. And I'm going to make an adjustment to what I said earlier, because my definition of small ball is, my approach is what you do every day is more important than what you do once in a while. But here's the twist. I think we all need to find something to do every day that is uncomfortable. That takes us a little bit out of our comfort zone. And so my little twist is, what you do every day that requires an act of bravery or courage. Because, people say, well, gosh, it must be easier for you now. And it's like, there are many days that I would love to do more than 30, but there are hundreds of days when I don't want to do them at all. And, for people who've struggled with their weight, it's easy to set a goal to lose the weight, but then celebrate with a gigantic piece of carrot cake. And that was always my pattern. And this time around, it was, no, it's 30 a day, get to 10,000. But here's what happened. I was always struggling with that last 10 or 15 pounds. And 30 a day, like clockwork, and those extra 12 pounds melted off. And they've stayed off. It wasn't about hitting the goal. Again, it was going back to that foundation.
Yeah, that's been my big shift in 2022. Yes, it started after New Year's. I'm not a resolution guy, more of okay, time to turn the page. And for the first time in my life, health-wise, I said, you know what, I don't want to set a goal. Yes, I know how much weight I'd like to lose, but instead of saying I want to lose X amount by this date, how about I would like to be at this weight at some point, and whether it's in 3 months or 6 months, but what can I do more importantly to create habits that are part of my everyday? So I now work out every day. I don't care if it is a 10-minute workout or a 60-minute workout. It's just, my fear is if you miss a day, okay, not the end of the world. But if that turns into 2, turns into 3, turns into 7 weeks, 2 years, like that, I've been there. So I think we get so transfixed on the end without really, I know this sounds somewhat simplistic, embracing the journey and just going there. By the way, 10,000 burpees over the course of 365 days, I just did the math, is about 27. So you at 30, you ended up actually outpacing that, and that worked for you. The second question, as we round the bases, I'll get to favorite quote. This could be like asking about a favorite child, because you have so many impactful. For me, it's done is better than perfect, but then it became non-negotiables set the standard, which is what's happened now with me saying I won't give up a workout in the day, even if it's a few minutes. That one's been very impactful for me. Non-negotiables set the standard. What is your favorite quote?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not even sure how to choose. At one point, it was consistency beats commitment, and then it moved to whatever, do it, whether you feel like it or not. A lot of people talk about commitment. A lot of people talk about consistency, but I think at the end of the day, it's about resolve. Will you do what it takes in order to take you where you want to go? And our depth of resolve for many people is wafer thin. And for me, it was wafer thin in the early years. And the bumps and the bruises and the scars and the recommitments. I often say I think I quit 1,000 times on my journey. And fortunately, I recommitted myself 1,001. But it was that depth of resolve that kept me in the game.
Third question, as we round the bases, I mentioned that you have written or co-written 4 different books, and I think I have all of them, and they're all great. I know you're not asking me to sell them, but I want to let everybody know: Growing Your Business, Never Be the Same, which is the one I'm holding right now, Build Your Consulting Practice, and Defining You, which is a fascinating book about statements and defining statements, stories, paragraphs, which is a whole different discussion for a different day. But as I open up Never Be the Same, there's a chapter early on in the book called One More Step. It reads, I don't know how long I sat on the bench after walking only 2 stinking miles. I could hear you saying this. Did I mention the rain? It seemed like that every excuse I had ever come up with for not reaching my goals flooded my mind. I read that because it leads into, and in the rest of the book, something that has become a major part of your life and a true love of yours, I believe, too. It's the picture behind you right now. Tell me about the Camino Trail.
Well, the Camino has been much more popular here in the United States because of a movie titled The Way, starring Martin Sheen. But I first heard about it in 2006, and people have been walking the Camino de Santiago, the 500-mile walk or pilgrimage across Spain, for over 1,000 years. And I first walked it in 2008, went back in 2014, again in 2017, and will go back in 2023. My 2020 Camino was delayed because of the pandemic. But it's the greatest, it's the most grueling and the most profound experience of my life. And what I've learned along the way has fueled my career in ways that are almost unimaginable or immeasurable. But I guess I've sort of become the Camino guy, and it's 30 days walking across northern Spain is the greatest retreat or moving meditation I think a person could make.
And a test of the I would imagine the soul, the mind, the heart, everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
the interesting thing about walking the Camino, one of the most common questions I get asked is, well, how do you train for the Camino? And I learned
burpees, of course.
Well, I wasn't doing burpees then, but I'll be ready next year. The interesting thing about the Camino is that it's much more a mental game than it is a physical game. Mm. And while yes, it is important to train, walking the Camino is an extraordinary achievement that pretty much any ordinary person can do. If you give yourself permission to walk a little bit slower, to take more breaks, to drink more water, anyone can, barring, two replaced knees and a replaced hip. I mean, for the most part, people from 20 to 80 walk the Camino, or a portion of it.
All right, last question as we wrap things up. My walk-off question: when you finish up a session, not a one-to-one, but you do these what you call Team LeBlanc, and this was a creation of the pandemic, and one I suspect will stay forever now, of a weekly Zoom call for any of your clients that want to get on. And it's a discussion group. It's themed. It's not just, hey, what's on your mind? There certainly is that, but it is a structured, moderated by you, and you've built a beautiful community. I've made a lot of friends on there that none of whom I've ever met in person. I'd like to at some point, but just a phenomenal community of caring and learning from each other. There's probably a couple others. You always say two things at the end of everyone. One is take a deep breath. And the other one is, well, there's a couple. You say about turning your clock back to zero, I think tomorrow, and then you tell everyone to do something for themselves. I'll fill in the blank. You tell everyone to set your fun meter on max, right? So how do you, or what do you do? It's my walk off, to set your fun meter on max.
Well, I do two things. It's the game of cards every day with Sweet Ann. And during the pandemic, we, like many people, adopted a couple of pets. We have two little adorable terrorists, our two pandemic puppies. And so whether it's 30 burpees to reset my physical clock, or playing a game of cards to reset my fun clock, or a little bit of emotional bonding with the two little adorable puppies, it's right. You take a deep breath, you reset your counters to zero, you get a good night's sleep, and you do what you need to do to get and keep your fun meter on max.
Which is something we all can learn from. If anyone wants to learn more about Marc, I'm not trying to sell him, although I would recommend him and have. You could check out his website, whether it's the speaking, the books, or so many nuggets and pearls of wisdom. MarcLeBlanc.com, MarcLeBlanc.com. It'll be in the show notes as well. If you're interested in his services from a coaching standpoint, he did not ask me to do this, and you could certainly reach out to him through the website, but feel free to get a hold of me as well, and I could certainly help and add my 2 cents in. And that's something that's the beauty of advocates. Something you've taught me well is that, if you like what someone does, you're going to want to share it. And that's something that I feel strongly in. So, I'm grateful for the friendship, the newer friendship, and and the opportunity to regularly learn from you and to have that mentor in my life. And I'm glad that you spent the time. You were right. We would go long. I knew it. You knew it. And we did, but all worthwhile. So I'm glad I had a chance to share this with all of my listeners and viewers. Mark, thanks so much for spending time on Rounding the Bases.
Thank you, Joel, and buen camino.
Yes. Maybe one day I'll try. I don't know. I don't know if I have the mental. I don't know what sounds worse, that or the burpees. The burpees sound worse for sure. Thanks, Mark.
All right. Bye for now.